Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our January monthly tips. We have a really full evening for all you guys tonight, and it's always great to see so many of you on in the middle of winter. And so we've got a lot of ground to cover tonight. We're going to have our normal monthly tips, just like we always do. And then we're also going to have near the end, we're going to have a panel of experts. Those have been really popular when we've done them in the recent past. And so we'll have Dodie Stillman, Matt Fuller, James and Sherry, myself, and we've got a lot of topics to discuss in that panel, but our focus is going to be late winter and early spring management. So as we're going through here tonight, as always, you can put your questions in the Q&A box if you have them. And if you want to save up some of those questions for near the end when we introduce that panel, you can put questions for that panel in the Q&A box, and I'll help moderate that Q&A box and ask questions of that expert panel for you. For those of you I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Blake Shook, and I'm one of the owners of Texas Bee Supply. I'm also a commercial beekeeper. We're a honey packer, and we do all sorts of things in the beekeeping world. So let's go ahead and jump in and get started. So Sherry, do you want to share with us anything about this month's magazine that just came out a couple of days ago?
I think I do.
Great.
It's pretty good, isn't it? Let me turn this down. I can't multitask these days. It's a good one. Look at that beautiful cover by a friend of ours in Kentucky. But we've got some really good topics, and I hope that everybody's really paying attention, that we're trying to throw in an in-depth article from time to time. And Ed Irwin's been very good. He's a master beekeeper, kind of local to me. Been doing a good job of doing that. I really would love to hear some feedback from y'all. If we're not covering topics you'd like, or if you want to just know a little bit more about one particular thing, please let us know. And of course, pictures. Send us pictures. We love that. Love that. But it ought to be a good night. We ought to get a lot of information, like Blake said. So we're good.
Awesome. Thank you, Sherry. As always, it's a wonderful, and you did a wonderful job. Just a quick reminder, we are doing pre-orders for bees. So if you need bees, packages, nooks, singles, queens, get those on pre-order now. Our early dates are rapidly filling up. And so if you want bees, go ahead and get those pre-ordered ASAP. Couple quick things. This is something I'm pretty excited about. You probably saw this in the pre-Zoom call ads that stream in the 30 minutes before the call, but we are starting a new company. So Texas Bee Supply is starting a new business called Commercial Bee Supply. Pretty close to Texas Bee Supply, but this new company is dedicated to commercial beekeepers. So Texas Bee Supply, as you guys know, we really specialize in education and focus on small scale beekeepers and growing small scale beekeepers as they grow into sideline beekeepers. Commercial Bee Supply is going to be all the way from products to services to education geared to commercial beekeepers. And so we actually have a facility. So our first location is in North Dakota, where I do a lot of work commercially. We have a facility that is now open up in Hettinger, North Dakota. It's kind of on the North Dakota, South Dakota line, but we do business and ship nationwide. And so, if you're in Texas, we will have all of the products that you'll be able to see at commercialbeesupply.com available for shipment into Texas. And if all goes well, then we'll be opening additional branches in the future for that business as well. I understand it's probably not terribly relevant to a lot of you guys on the call, but because it is, part of the Texas Bee Supply family, I wanted to let you guys know first. We officially are open, but not really. Our website won't go live for a couple more weeks. So if you go to commercialbeesupply.com, all you'll see is a sign up page where you can stay up to date with what we're doing with CBS. And then the website will go live in a couple weeks, as well our catalog, where you can kind of see all the products that we have that are geared towards commercial beekeepers. And then eventually we hope to branch into a lot of the education that you see here with Texas Bee Supply. We hope to expand that with commercial bee supply, so more commercial, high-level, dedicated education. So we're not doing that just yet. We've got plenty to do just to get commercial bee supply off the ground. And so as we're, once we get that up and running smoothly, then we'll kick in the education part of that business. And you guys are all more than welcome to participate in some of the education that we do through commercial bee supply if you're interested in what goes on in the commercial world or interested in growing into the commercial world. So you'll be hearing more about this as we grow it and as we get a little further down the road, because all of you guys are kind of like family to us. We wanted to kind of give you guys the very first look. We're not publicizing it heavily yet, because like I said, we're just really just getting up and off the ground, and it's going to take a number of months to really get everything rolling smoothly the way we want it. But so yeah, we'll be keeping you guys up to date on that a bit as it grows. So something that really sad that any of you guys that went through beginning beekeeping classes in Blue Ridge knew Janet Rowe. Janet Rowe was a very close friend of mine and of Texas Bee Supply and many beekeepers in North Texas. She was passed away. She was really tragically killed in a car accident a couple of weeks ago. And she was a commercial beekeeper and then a sideline beekeeper. And recently she became a small scale beekeeper as she was kind of getting out of the commercial side. And just a beautiful person, personality and wealth of knowledge in the beekeeping world. So keep her family in your thoughts and prayers. If you knew her, then you will feel her loss, because there was nobody quite like Janet. So, if you want to know how to reach out to the family or anything, then feel free to let me know or ask anybody at TBS, and we can certainly help with that. But we will severely miss Janet. So, okay. So what I want to do now is, before we get into our main program for the evening, I'm actually streaming this. I'm in Las Vegas at the American Beekeeping Federation Conference. So ABF is the largest national beekeeping group in the country, and I've been on the board and a part of that organization for almost 15 years now, and it's a wonderful organization. It's a federation of small scale beekeepers, sideline beekeepers, commercial beekeepers, queen breeders, all sizes and scales of beekeepers are under this federation. And we have a meeting every year, a conference every year, open to all the members, and happens to be in Las Vegas this year. And so we're only about halfway through the conference. It only started yesterday, but I wanted to give you guys, just for the fun of it, a quick overview of some of the highlights that I've seen, some of the newest things in the industry that I've noticed, and we have heard a lot of reports on. This may or may not be interesting to some of you, but so I'll make it brief. But it is a fascinating conference. Next year, it's in, I should know this, but I think it's in either Florida or Georgia, somewhere that side of the country. And so, we'd love to see you there if you we're interested in coming. It's a great educational time. And then of course, Texas Bee Supply and commercial bee supply will have booths there, and hey, we'll take you to dinner if you come to ABF. So two quick things I wanted to mention that have happened so far at this conference. One is the opening keynote speaker was Jamie Ellis, who, as you guys know, is a great guy. We have him on these webinars fairly often. One of the greatest researchers I know. The neat thing about Jamie Ellis is his passion is beekeeping, but he's a brilliant scientist as well. And he does a very good job, kind of like Randy Oliver, at bridging the gap between research and researchers and beekeepers and beekeeping. And so he did a keynote presentation that I thought really did a wonderful job of summarizing where the beekeeping industry is today and where it needs to go in the future. And a couple things he mentioned, his main emphasis was on sustainability. And he made the point, which I totally agree on, and that is that sustainability is a ridiculously overused word in today's culture and means almost nothing because it's so overused. But he really talked about what are the greatest issues facing beekeeping today, and it really boiled down to um, pesticides, pests, weather, and nutrition were essentially the four biggest things facing bees and beekeeping today. And he really charted out a path on, this is how we need to move all four of those forward to help beekeeping become sustainable. There's been a huge focus this week from Jamie's presentation, but from many others on, how do we breed better bees? How do we get away from chemical use? How do we breed better varroa mite resistance? How do we breed better bees and really work on those genetics so we can get away from some of the practices that none of us like? And so I'm so encouraged by the way the direction the industry is moving as a whole. Is really looking long term for once and saying, okay, in all these major areas of pesticide use and varroa mites and weather issues and nutrition, how do we look long term and fix them from a very sustainable standpoint? And that's kind of where, as an industry, we're moving. And that, to some of you who hear that in marketing all the time, that may not sound amazing or impressive, but for the beekeeping industry, that's pretty amazing. That is not the direction the industry has been heading in typically over the last decade. And over the last year or two, it's really seen a big shift in that direction from commercial beekeepers, sideline beekeepers, and small scale beekeepers. So I'm an optimist. I don't think you can really be a good beekeeper without being an optimist, but I'm optimistic about the way the industries go. So the other quick thing I wanted to mention that's on the tip of everybody's tongue nationally is a huge anti-dumping lawsuit that is going on right now that will impact every beekeeper, whether you have 2 hives in your backyard or 2,000 or 20,000. And I'll briefly explain. I don't want to take too much of our time. I'll briefly explain kind of what's going on there. So essentially, about 15 years ago now, China was dumping massive amounts of honey into the United States. For those of you that don't know, we consume about 600 million pounds of honey annually in the US. About 120 to 150 million pounds are actually produced in the US. So the vast majority of honey consumed is imported. So about 15 years ago, China was dumping huge amounts of honey into the US market. And it's such a cheap price that domestic producers couldn't make a living, essentially. I mean, they were selling honey at below what it cost to produce because of kind of this unfair trade practice by China. So the US beekeeping industry, the American Beekeeping Federation, and the one other national organization, the American Honey Producers Association, sued China and won. And so sued China. I would say, hey, these are unfair trade practices. And essentially what happened is the US government put about a 500% tariff on any Chinese honey coming into the US, made it completely unaffordable. And so that stopped the imports from China. That immediately increased domestic honey prices, and it kind of fixed the problem in the short term. So over the past 15 years since that's happened, 2 other things have happened. China has begun shipping their honey, what we call transshipping. They're shipping their honey to other countries who are then shipping it into the US at unfairly low prices. And about 5 other countries have started doing what China was doing, just shipping huge amounts of honey into the US. And sometimes it's honey mixed with syrups at a price so low that domestic producers can't compete. A good example is, last year, 2020, my commercial beekeeping business, when we sold honey by the barrel in truckload quantities, we had to sell it for about what it cost us to produce it. That's how bad it was last year, which is not a great way to sustain a business. So the industry got together and filed another lawsuit against 5 countries this time that were doing that dumping of honey into the United States. And the lawsuit's not done yet, but we feel like there's about a 98% chance. The lawsuit won. Essentially, we've passed it. It's won. There are some additional hoops that continue jumping through over the next couple of months, but that lawsuit is still somewhat pending, but it's cleared the major hurdles. And already we've seen about a 75 to 80% increase in the value of honey, which is kind of amazing. So we went from last year record low honey prices to this year record high honey prices. And that will trickle all the way down. So from commercial beekeepers sideline to small scale, the value of honey is going up, and it's going up fast. In the past, you guys, if you're selling honey at a farmer's market, there might be 1 pound of honey for sale in a major retail grocery for, $4 or $5. Well, that's about to go up to potentially double. That 1 pound honey in the grocery store isn't going to be $4 or $5. It is going to be $6, $7, $8, $9, $10, starting relatively soon. And so on a small scale, if you're selling at a farmer's market, you can start raising your honey price as well. You may have to raise it, and you can get far more than whatever a box retail grocery store is getting. So you'll have more room to raise honey prices as well. So anyway, enough on that. I've probably given you so much more information than you are interested in as far as the anti-dumping stuff. But if you have additional questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A, and I'll go back and answer them later in tonight if you have more questions about them. So, okay, so January tips. We unfortunately are not going to be able to jump out into the bee yard for 2 reasons. Number one, I'm in Las Vegas and have been all week at the conference, so I haven't been able to get into the bees. Secondly, if I'm sure all of you noticed, it's been pretty chilly. I was going to go out and film a bee yard session before I left on Monday, but it was the weather. I wasn't comfortable jumping into bees when it was so cold. So you'll have to forgive me there, but we've got plenty to touch on tonight without that. So here comes spring, right? This is my yard, and I'm sure you guys are seeing it too. We've got dandelions, especially prior to last week, and now it's cold all of a sudden. But we really started seeing dandelions. I started seeing dandelions bloom. I put that maybe in there because I said the exact same thing at the January webinar last year. I was like, okay, look, hey, all these flowers are blooming. Spring's coming. Looks like it's going to be an early spring. And you guys all remember what happened in February. So I'm not going to make any predictions this year as to what on earth is when spring is going to officially start. But there are some early spring plants blooming. I've seen some clovers blooming, which is interesting. The mustard, I've seen it blooming. This center picture here, that yellow mustard, I've seen some of it start blooming. A lot of it is coming up really well. Dandelions, I've seen blooming. The henbit on the far right, I've seen blooming a little bit. And how much that blooms and how much of a pollen flow we have when just depends on the weather. And we've kind of gotten a lot chillier in the past week and week and a half. And so that'll definitely put a damper on some of those blooming plants. Up until last week, my goodness, I was seeing a decent pollen flow in a lot of areas. And this cold weather is kind of shutting that down a bit. If you are in the South, then one of the things I'm always watching for to kind of alert me that, okay, spring, in the bee world, spring is here, is when the elm starts blooming. And so when the elm tree starts blooming, that's when I go, okay, this is the official start of the bee season, spring, which is usually, ranges from the last week in January to the second week of February, depending on where you are in the South. But that's one of the plants I really use as a barometer to where we are in the spring. So what I'm seeing right now when I go look at bees and the weather, get ready for the roller coaster, because this is the time of year, really now through March, when it's all over the place. We're going to have hot weeks where the bees are flying like crazy and they're bringing in lots of pollen. And then we're going to have freezes and freezing cold weeks. And so you're going to see this roller coaster of pollen flow. You're going to see a roller coaster. The queen will lay a bunch of eggs in the hive on that warm week, and then it's going to get cold, and the bees are going to cannibalize a lot of those eggs. And so, we're just kind of in for a roller coaster, and that's normal over the next couple of months. But longer days are here, and brood rearing has begun for the new year. Now, there may not be a lot. In some places, it never really ended, especially if you're in Southeast Texas, parts of East Texas, South Texas, even in North Texas, some and other surrounding states. I mean, I've got hives that never stopped rearing brood. And it was just because it was such a warm December. I'm also seeing a slight pollen trickle, like I talked about earlier. If you're in Southeast Texas, I've talked to some folks that have a significant pollen flow through December and early, before it got cold recently. So all that to say, expect a roller coaster. Bee flight is going to follow that roller coaster. You're going to have intense bee flight during those warm periods, no bee flight during the cold periods. And then we're going to talk about feed implications later. How do we manage that roller coaster? And in most cases, the bees manage the roller coaster just fine on their own. We may not have to do much, but you need to know some of the key things to watch for. And we'll talk about that. I'll talk about that, and we'll get into that with the panel as well. Just keep in mind, like I've already kind of mentioned, regions vary greatly in December when it comes to that roller coaster. So watch your bees. Don't just take my word for it. Watch your own hives to understand what's going on and when and what they need. So parts of the state, you might have snow, and the other part, they may have a pollen flow. And, once we get to, April, May, June, we have decently consistent weather across the South. But January, February, and into March, you can have huge variations in what the bees are doing. And based on, if you're in Southeast Texas, North Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, et cetera. So just expect that. When it comes to feeding, here's what I do personally, and I feel as though it typically works. For January, I feed as needed to maintain about 20 pounds of stores in the second box through January. My goal is not to feed any of my bees in January. If I properly prepared my hive in the fall, then I don't expect to need to feed anything in January as far as syrup goes, because I got that 40-50 pound surplus on the hive in the fall. That should carry them all the way through into spring. If for some reason your hive didn't have that surplus, or if you're running singles, for example, you might need to feed some in January. So if you have 20 pounds or less of honey stored up in your second box, and you've got at least one deep box mostly full of bees, you may need to feed a bit to try to maintain 20 pounds in that second box. Just as by way of reference, 20 pounds is about half of a medium box full or a third of a deep box full of honey. If you do feed 2-to-1 syrup rather than 1-to-1. If you're feeding syrup, you can feed sugar bricks. We talked about that some last month, and then Stan Gore was gracious enough to write an article for us in last month's Texas Bee Supply Monthly magazine detailing feeding sugar bricks, and so I would reference you to that. Division board feeders or top feeders rather than entrance feeders need to be used if you're feeding a liquid syrup. A liquid syrup works great if the weather's warm. Like you could have fed through the whole month of December essentially, because we had so many warm days. If it stays in the 50s, and the bees stay clustered, they aren't really going to take liquid syrup very well, because they're not going to break that cluster to go get it. That's where those sugar bricks come in handy, or a type of feeder that sits right on top of the brood nest, like a top feeder, et cetera. We talked about that in the December webinar quite a bit, so you can go back and watch that on YouTube. Okay, yeah, so we covered that. Open pollen feeding. A lot of folks have questions about open pollen feeding, and we talked about this a bit in December too. But By way of reminder, open pollen feeding does work pretty well if you want to do it in December and January when there's virtually no natural pollen available. Does it help the bees? Well, it certainly doesn't hurt the bees. How much it helps? I think it can help. I mean, it can help stimulate some early brood rearing in January. It's not critical. Honestly, what I use open pollen feeding the most for is to help my bees not be a nuisance to neighbors. Because as we talked about in December, when there's no natural pollen flow and you have those really warm days or weeks, bees are going to go forage on anything that resembles pollen. They'll go forage on chicken feed, animal feed, sawdust, and they may really be annoying your neighbors with chickens out and trying to feed their chickens. I always get complaints this time of year of, hey, your bees are eating my sawdust, or your bees are eating my chicken food. And well, they're not exactly. They're getting the dust off of it and collecting it like pollen, even though it has no nutritional benefit because there's nothing else out there. So if you have that issue, one way to mitigate that is to provide an alternative for your bees, which is that open pollen feeding, dry pollen feeding. And so I use it for that more than anything else. We talked about it last month, but these are just some pollen feeders. You can use anything to be an open pollen feeder. My favorite is this middle one here, this Nook box. So the Pro Nook box that you've got a Nook from, open the entrances, put a couple scoops of dry pollen powder in there, and keeps it dry. It's a great tool to use to feed that dry pollen. Pollen patties. Some beekeepers do feed the actual pollen patty, like you see in the picture here, in January to help boost up brood production. I don't usually do it personally. It's not going to hurt anything. But when I do feed, and we're going to talk about this a lot more as spring progresses, it's not quite as relevant in January. It becomes much more relevant in February and March. What I really watch for when it comes to pollen substitute is the weather and the amount of brood I have in my hives. Because if I've got a hive that's just growing like crazy and it's got 6 or 7 frames of brood, tons of bees, really growing. You often see this in February. And then you've got a cold front that comes in and it's, 50, doesn't get out of the 50s during the day for a week or 10 days. If I see that coming in the forecast, I'll often go out and put a pollen patty or two on those really strong hives. Because often what happens is when the bees are growing so quickly, and then all of a sudden they can't get out and forage, they start running out of pollen reserves and will often start cannibalizing that brood, and they're not able to rear the brood because they don't have the pollen resources and they're not able to go out and forage. That's where a pollen patty can help them maintain that brood and that growth. It's not the end of the world if you don't feed it in those periods either. But, in February, March, if I see that 10-day cold spell coming, I'll go out. It's worth a couple bucks per hive in pollen patties to keep that brood production going, in my opinion. Okay, so I'm going to hit a couple just random topics that are somewhat relevant to this time of year. Some of them are not. And before we get to the panel, January is kind of our potluck topic of the year, because we're like, it's not quite spring and it's not quite the dead of winter, but well, it kind of is. It's not, it's kind of in between the bee seasons. And so this is when I like to hit some random topics. But one of them that is kind of relevant to January is, and it's a question I get a lot, is my hive queenless or just not raising brood yet? Because on these warm days, you may go out and do an inspection in your hive and say, well, I don't see any brood. Is my hive queenless? Or have they just not started laying yet? And that's a common issue in the wintertime. And there's a couple key questions I ask myself when I'm trying to decide, is my hive queenless or not? One thing I look at is pollen flow and food stores. If there's a trickle of a pollen flow and my hive has plenty of food stores in January, I expect to at least see some eggs. If there's no pollen flow at all, or if they're low on food stores, I don't necessarily expect to see any brood. And I'm calling brood eggs, larvae, or calf brood. I look at the weekly temperatures. You know, if it's been warm for a week and the bees have been flying and they aren't low on food stores, I expect to see at least some eggs in the hive. If it's, you know, the tail end of a cold week, you know, like, you know, it's been cold this week. If you were to go out, you know, Monday, I think it's going to warm up Monday. If you were to go out and look at your hives Monday, I bet a lot of them don't have any eggs because we've had this really cold week. The queen probably wasn't laying much this week, and the bees might have cannibalized whatever eggs she did lay. Kind of back to that roller coaster. I look, did the hive have eggs and brood during the fall? So if they did, well, good sign. You know, what's the population like? If you just have a hive that's 2 frames of bees total, they're not going to have nearly the eggs or brood that a hive next door that's got 10 frames of bees. You know, the larger, the stronger the hive, the earlier they're going to start rearing brood. The weaker and smaller the hive, the less they're going to, the later they're going to start rearing brood. You know, when I have 2 deep boxes full of bees in January, they'll often have a couple frames of brood starting now, even if it's really cold outside, because they've got so many bees, so much warmth to start rearing brood earlier. So population's a big one I look at. The stronger the hive, the more I expect to see brood. And then finally, I look at what's going on in my other beehives. You know, do all my other hives have brood? And then this one hive that's equivalent strength doesn't have any brood at all. If that's the case, then okay, they might be queenless. So I kind of run through those factors and I'm trying to decide if a hive is queenless or not. At the end of the day, I don't make any ultimate judgment calls as far as if it's queenless or not, because there's not much you can do about it this time of year. If they still don't have any eggs or larvae in February, they're most definitely queenless in most cases. And then you could join it with another hive. Or if they're still a really strong hive, you know, if they've still got, you know, 6 or 7 or more frames of bees, you could wait until you can get an early queen in March, or give them a frame of eggs in late February and they'll raise their own queen. Another common issue that folks beekeepers often have in January, really November, December, January, or February, is, you know, we often have hives that die, which is unfortunate, but, you know, 40+% of beehives die every year nationwide. So we all are going to lose bees. And it's not terribly uncommon to have mold. You know, if you had a hive die and you didn't get out there to get it picked up for a month and maybe some water got inside, it's not uncommon to see mold in the hive like you see in these pictures. A lot of beekeepers get afraid of that and go, oh no, do I need to burn everything and throw it away? Because, you know, mold isn't a good thing. Fortunately, it doesn't seem to negatively impact using this comb for future hives. And so whenever I see mold like this in my hives, I rinse it out. I literally get a water hose and kind of spray those cells out, wash all that mold off of a frame. Doesn't have to be perfect. Dry it. So shake the water out of that comb, maybe tap it dry with a paper towel, let it sit in a really dry area for a couple of days to get that water out of the frames, and then store it and reuse it next year. So don't be afraid of mold in a hive. Comb is still reusable. Just clean it up and you can use it again in the spring. I mean, I've even had frames, just for curiosity's sake, I've taken moldy frames and stuck them directly into hives in the spring and didn't notice any detrimental impact on the bees. You know, they cleaned them up, cleaned out the mold, didn't notice any issues in the hive. I've never really seen any studies that point, doesn't mean they don't exist, but I've never seen a study that showed that any of these molds are really harmful to the beehive. So if this happens to you, just clean them up and feel free to reuse that comb. Okay, one of the last quick topics I want to touch on before we jump into our panel is, I love this, a common question is hive record keeping. And, you know, it seems like a good time to talk about record keeping in hives because, hey, it's the middle of winter. What else do we have to do? And so Tara did a really great job, I think, of sharing her method on how to keep records in a hive. For hives. And then I'll share a little bit about how I do it. And then if you guys want even more information on record keeping, somebody asked that during the panel discussion, and we can hear several different inputs on how folks keep records of their hives and what's going on in them. So let's jump over to this video and see how Tara recommends hive record keeping.
Keeping is such a great topic. Everyone has their own way. Lots of people just like pen and paper. I will say record keeping is really important, and I encourage you to find some way to keep really good records. We think we're going to remember. I promise, even if your brain's a lot younger than mine, we're going to forget. And especially when you're just learning, there's so much coming at you that keeping good records is really going to help you understand what's happening in your hive from one season to the next. Just a notebook and pen and paper works just fine. I actually use, and there are lots of systems. There's apps out there that are free and some that you pay for. They're not my favorite because I like certain things to track and then other things that I don't really care about. But they can help guide you, particularly if you're pretty new. What I use actually is a system called Trello, and it is nothing to do with bees. It's actually like a project manager software. And because I have 50 or 60 different sites, with anywhere from 6 to 15 hives in each of these sites, and I've got 3 beekeepers that work for me, we all kind of have to be on the same page. And so this system is great because think of like a wall of just sticky notes. And each sticky note on the wall represents one site. And in that, when we click on that card or that virtual sticky note, it has all the information that we need about the site. And then it actually has like a place for comments, and the most recent comment stacks on top. So that would be a great system to check out for any of y'all that maybe have more hives or have lots of apiary sites. I can't recommend it enough. You also could, if you just got 5 or 6 hives, you could use the same system, and each of your cards could actually represent a hive. But it's just a kind of a clever way to keep notes. But whatever you choose, just make sure that you're keeping lots of notes, particularly in the beginning, because it really does help your learning.
So there you go. So yeah, I love Trello is a great one if you guys are looking for a specific app. And there are a lot of other beekeeping specific apps out there for record keeping. So there are many. I can't list them all here. You can do something as simple as a spreadsheet. That's what me and our crews often use Google Sheets, because it's shareable between all of the crews and everyone, and we can all kind of see data entry. And so it can be as super simple, something like this. You can use an app. Some of my favorite ways to keep records is the old brick method. If a hive needs something, you put a brick on the lid and turn it or orient it a different way, depending on what it needs. We've put sticks on tops of hives. We've put a little hive tool scoop of mud on top of hives. There's all different ways to mark it. Another one of my favorite ways is just to get a pencil and write on the hive. To get a pencil, a carpenter pencil, and then just take notes on the back side of the hive box itself on what's going on in that hive, what you did, what that hive needs, etc. If you don't want to mess up the paint on your hive box, I know some beekeepers that will write on the inner cover. So we'll take the telescoping cover off, and they'll take their notes on the inner cover and then put the lid back on. So a lot of interesting ways to keep notes on your hives. And yeah, so, and then again, if you want to hear more opinions on that, then ask us during the panel, and you'll get a handful of more notes. Another thing that you will often see that this time of year is dead bees in front of your hives, and that's not uncommon. Those bees that were reared in the fall are starting to die off, and as they die off, on warm days especially, the worker bees are going to be bringing them out the front door of the hive and throwing them away. And it's normal, perfectly normal, to see dozens or maybe even 100 dead bees in front of your hive this time of year. What you shouldn't see is like this picture over here on the left, hundreds and hundreds of dead bees. That indicates a problem. Usually that means the hive has essentially died through varroa mite kill, pesticide spray, etc. But dozens or even 100 dead bees in front of your hive this time of year is very normal. And it's pretty normal for a while as those winter bees continue to die off. And very soon we'll have those replaced by spring bees. So when you're doing your hive inspections for January, this is what I would expect to see. And this is what I'm starting to see, minimal but increasing brood production, region dependent, of course, some pollen stores, and at least 20 pounds of stored honey in the second box. So that's your average hive. There's going to be hives on either side of that spectrum, but that's what I'm typically seeing. Combining hives in January. So just a couple side notes here as you look at your bees and you kind of assess the strength of them. Don't get too wrapped up in trying to gauge the strength of your beehive unless it's around 60 degrees outside. If you're just taking a really quick look at your hive and it's 40 degrees, they're going to be clustered so tight in that hive. It's going to be tough to get an accurate view of how strong or weak that hive is. So wait till it's about, if you're thinking about combining a hive, or if you say, oh, I've got this one hive, it looks pretty weak, I think I need to combine it. Do another inspection when it's around 60 degrees and sunny, and you'll do a better job of getting an accurate assessment of the strength of the hive. I recommend combining hives that are 2 frames total. So both boxes, if they're a total of 2 frames of bees or less, go ahead and combine them. If they're more than that, then, well, they've made it this far. I would see if they can just go ahead and make it through the rest of the year into spring. Because if they can even get into February with 3 or 4 frames of bees, and that queen really starts laying hard, they might just pull through. So, if this were November, I would say, if there's 4 frames of bees or less, combine them. They've made it this far, so 2 frames or less, yeah, I'd probably combine them. Just for a point of reference, this hive over here on the far left, that's about 4 frames of bees, as you can kind of tell looking at them. The one on the right, that's more like 1 or 2 frames of bees. It's probably not going to pull through. If you just can't bring yourself to combine them, this time of year, it's not going to hurt just to leave them be and see if they pull through or not. Okay, so with that, I am going to let's jump into our panel here and talk. We're going to talk about late winter and early spring management. So, panel, if you guys all want to show your screens there, yeah, show us your faces, and for all of you attendees, feel free to go ahead and start putting questions about late winter or early spring management in the Q&A box, and I'll feed those to the panel. Before we do that, though, I want to give just a minute or so to each of the panel attendees so that you guys can share with us who you are and a bit of your beekeeping background. We have, Matt Fuller is here tonight, phenomenal beekeeper, active on so many levels. Dodie Stillman's here, current vice president of Texas Beekeepers Association and beekeeper extraordinaire, and of course the Elams.
Blake, let me tell you something.
Sure.
Matt says you need to give him his camera. It says it's disabled.
Mine is too.
I'm
Dodie's
sorry about that,
too.
Matt and Dodie. Yeah,
That's one way to get the stage to ourselves, isn't it?
yeah, we were gonna hog this thing.
That was by design.
There you go. I forgot I have to make you guys
There's
co-hosts.
Dodie. All right, Matt, give yours a try.
Yeah, there we go.
There we go. There's Matt.
I may be a phenomenal beekeeper, but I'm not that easy to look at. So.
Oh.
I need to put a background too because that's my bed. So y'all don't like it that I don't make up my bed.
That's okay.
I was worried about no pictures on the wall.
That's why
Let me sit this way.
That's why I have a virtual background, Dodie. Okay, so
Sorry.
if you guys, maybe we'll start James and Sherry, just a minute overview of you guys, and then Dodie, and then Matt would be awesome.
James said I'm supposed to talk because he's still typing answers.
Okay.
James and I have been beekeeping for multiple years now. And we've had a bunch of bees up to over 100 bees at a time, down to just a dozen or so.
100 of those bees. Huh?
100. They could all fit in one hand. But we've been teaching for a long time, and we're pretty traditional beekeepers, I think.
I think if you
tried and
summed us
true.
up, it would be. We are traditionalist beekeepers.
That's right.
We teach by the book. I mean, we don't experiment.
We really don't.
That may make us boring, but it keeps us consistent.
Well, I've heard that we are boring, but no, that's it, pretty much. We do teach by the book, and we beekeep by the book. You know, that's one reason why Blake and James and Sherry get along so well. We're pretty simplistic beekeepers that we don't try to reinvent the wheel, and we're happy that we're instructors for the Dayton Huffman area location of Texas Bee Supply, and we hope that continues for a long time. That's us.
Thanks, guys. Go ahead, Dodie.
So I am the VP of the TBA. I spent all day long sitting in this chair, getting ready for signing contracts for Temple and Conroe and getting conferences set up. So no bee work. And that was a bummer. It's all
It's
been
January.
paperwork. But I've had bees since I think it was like 2012 that I first got bees. So it's been a while too. I've had enough that I've never been a year without. I've not ever lost so many. Even when I started with just 2, I kept them alive pretty consistently, because I could go out there every day and I have to be held back. So I'm always making sure that there are bees in the box, that there are lots of bees in the box, that there's food in the box, all that good stuff. So I try real hard. I have to stop myself from opening the boxes all the time. What else?
Sounds
That's
great.
it.
No,
That's
that's
it.
awesome.
Oh, and
Perfect.
I do a lot of teaching too, and I'm hoping to be able to teach here too.
And we hope so too. Awesome. Thank you, Dodie. All right, Matt.
And last but probably least, I am a beekeeper out of Montgomery. I grew up in Sealy, and we have a farm in Weimar. So kind of have those are our 3 major areas. I consider myself a sideliner, my certainly not commercial in any venture of any sort. But one of the things that, as I was listening to James and Sherry, who I affectionately refer to as the godfather and godmother of beekeeping in Texas, you really have to think about your identity as a beekeeper. And so I would say, as a panelist tonight, I guess my contribution that I'm going to always come back to as we answer these questions, as we think through them, is economics. And the reason I say that is a lot of the things that I do in my bee yards have to do with things like, how far do I have to drive to do this? Is it worth my time to do that? How much is this going to cost me? Is this going to get my CFO, who also happens to be my wife, upset at me? And those are kind of things I'm going to talk about a little bit more tonight. So
Fantastic. No, that sounds great. Thank you guys. So we've got some questions up here already, and I'm going to ask a few of those, and then there will be time, Matt. I mean, you brought up some great points on, the economic side that we would love to hear, and so we'll make sure to leave some time in the end if any of you guys have some things you want to share, certainly. So there's a lot of questions in here about pollen flow and the spring. So here's one. Christine's asking. She says, I have a robust hive here in the Houston area that I want to split early in the spring. Now, when is the best time to do that? I'm worried that they'll swarm otherwise. And so I'll kind of add to that, because it's a really, really good kind of late winter question to start thinking through, is when do I do my splits? What do I do if I have a really strong hive and it's too early to split? So if one or two of you want to tackle how folks should start thinking ahead to splitting, that would be great.
Well, I'll start it, but then I want to make sure that Dodie and Matt hop in on this. Matt, of course, is closer to this area. It's really hive specific, and it's can be area specific down to the county, truly, and availability of queens. What is your goal for spring? Are you wanting to grow your yard? And if you are, you could probably make more than one split on a thriving colony. We've done, I know James, some years we're getting 4 or 5 splits out of a single or a double deep hive. So don't you don't need to think I can just make a split. You can make multiples out of a double deep hive. There's abilities to really grow your apiary. But as far as timing, I'd be prepped. I'd get my queen ordered. Texas Bee Supply, we've got them ready to order. I get them on order. And be ready to pick them up the minute they're available.
I think that's an opportunity to make a quick statement that we talk about spring splits, and that a beekeeper that has a small number of hives, a typical hobby beekeeper that may have 1 or 2, be careful with that split.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can go from one colony to no colonies if the luck of the draw is wrong, or if you don't fully understand, or if you refer back to Blake's 40% loss. So be very careful in that split. I think that 1 to 2 colony is the opportunity to purchase a nuke. That's golden, and nukes survive so well during spring. Grow your apiary with a purchased colony when you have a small quantity of bees, and if you get up to 6 or 8 or 4 or whatever that number is to you, where you can afford to lose something, then learn splits, take a splits class, and watch your population grow, colony in your apiary grow.
Take our splits class.
Yeah, there you go. Matt or Dodie, what do you guys think?
I think a lot, it depends on when you can get a queen. And think about the queens that are out there that people are growing, they all have to have drones. So when you see drones in your colony, that's a good sign that people that are raising queens in your area can now get mated, their queens mated. So that's when you're going to be able to get your queens. And say your robust colony is huge, check the stores on it. Do you have some empty honey frames in there that you can pull out, or maybe put them closer to the brood nest so that they don't feel like they're so crammed? Or go ahead and put that next box on there. If you need time and you're nervous that they're gonna, if it's a huge 80% of it's filled out already, go ahead and give them some more space, and then you can collapse them back down to make your split whenever you do get the queen in hand.
Perfect.
So, drones is your first thing, and if you feel like you need it sooner, give them some more space.
Perfect.
That's my answer.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt. Bring us home.
Well, I will bring you home, Blake. I'll mention 2 things that you said and one that Dodie just said. One of the times that my experience as a beekeeper, I really felt like I was maturing, was when I stopped thinking about things in terms of a calendar and started thinking in terms of indicators in the hive. So to the question of what month should I be doing splits, as Sherry said, it's so specific. You really need to look at indicators. Dodie just gave you one: drones. Blake, earlier you gave me one of the, I didn't know I was doing this, but I was, I look at all the flowers in my yard. I look at the elm trees, and when I know things are progressing on, I just it's more of a qualitative feel, if you will, that things are right, that you can do this. We do have one little comment in the chat that's relative to this. If you don't mind, I'll just real briefly say that. Shalana was asking about, can you split, and do you have to forego all of your honey for the rest of the year? And Shalana, I'm not gonna lecture anybody. I'll just say that's really tough. That is really tough on the bees. I find myself getting really greedy and, wanting to take honey from a new split or something, and just normally doesn't work out so well in that first year. I take the approach of, bees have been doing their things long before we have. So let's let them do their thing and try to get out of the way as much as possible. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a great point. Yeah. Great. Thank you guys. Okay. Let's see. Russell asked kind of in relation to this, are there any comments on building new hives by taking resources from strong hives and creating nooks versus a whole box split? So pros and cons to, making a smaller nook instead of dividing up a whole entire hive into whole box splits. So any of you guys do splitting methods using more of a nook versus a whole hive?
I mean, I certainly, when I take that approach for queen rearing and things of that nature, I'm certainly starting with small mating nukes and doing that. And I've every once in a while, I'll if I happen to have an odd number of frames left out or something, I might throw those in a small nook or something. But generally speaking, when I do a split or I do even mating boxes, I really want to try to get that new colony off to its best start. So I try to not skimp, and it's really tough. But there have been situations I've done with a smaller box. So.
I think we have too. I think it's what we're trying to accomplish. There's times that we make big splits and some times that we make small splits. If we're trying to build a bunch of nukes to sell, then they're probably going to start off with 2 frames or 3 frames of brood and some resources, and we're going to build them out. But I mean, there's been a lot of times we just go out there and just take a double deep and make sure everybody's in the right order and set it over to the side. And you've not lost any honey production on that. You just added a queen and you're up and running. So I think it just depends on what our goal is.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I had a horrible, mean hive. And my goal was to make them small and give them all new queens. So I split that thing down to 4 or 5 hives and put in new queens. So yeah, whatever your goal, it depends.
Yeah.
Mean bees will be a good goal.
Yes.
It's a good reason to split small.
Yeah. There is some research out there that I mostly buy into that shows, splitting hives into nook boxes, 5-frame nook boxes. And then when they completely fill that up, transferring them into a single story hive encourages more rapid growth. And I mean, I've tried it and I've seen some success with it. I mean, there seems to be something to be said for not having just tremendous amounts of extra space that the bees don't need yet, but really, keeping a little warmer in the chilly spring in a smaller nook box, pack that out. And then when you put them in that new space, they just kind of explode into that new space. So there could be something there. I don't usually do that method because it's a lot of extra steps, but if you just have a few hives, it's worth experimenting with for sure.
Great.
Okay, let's see, Joe, we've got a couple questions about pollen flows and pollen, and then we may jump back to splits because lots of folks are having questions on splits. But Joe is asking, the pollen forecast right now shows that there's lots of juniper and cedar pollen. Are the bees gathering that pollen right now? And so we kind of have a cross section of regions here. What are you guys seeing in your regions as far as pollen flow, early pollen flow? What plants are you looking for in January, February to start blooming?
You were talking about honey prices going up. Man, if we could figure out how to get cedar into our honey, it would be so we would have, oh my gosh. Right. But no, it's, everybody wants that honey that's got cedar pollen in it so that they can try it for their allergies. Our bees are shivering, huddled together. They're not out flying and picking up that pollen. So such a bummer. But
we don't have anything.
I'm in Central Texas and my bees haven't, I mean, when they're flying, they are bringing in pollen. So I've got some that I've put out for play. Like you said, it won't hurt, but it's probably not doing all that much good because they're bringing it in themselves. Every bee I see's got stuff on her legs. So,
Well, here too, I don't know what it is, but we really can't see anything going on. But yeah, there's still something coming in. But we do that too, Dodie. We put some out for them to play in, just because we like to watch them.
yes,
It's fun. It's fun to watch them play.
it's a pollen party.
Now, I will say that my honey right here knows when a cedar pollen flow is occurring
Yes, I
in
do.
your part of Texas, Dodie. So
Mhm.
she does take in pollen.
Yeah.
Gosh, it's terrible. Keep it up
It
there.
is.
Blake, the things I follow are exactly what you listed earlier. I look for henbit at this time of year. There's a few things popping up there. There's what I call field aster. It's just a little small daisy-like looking flower, a bunch of little white ones over here in Houston area. But right now, what we're seeing is exactly what Blake said earlier. Chicken feed pollen, and let me see, they're getting I've even seen them picking off of Johnson grass, getting resins off of Johnson grass. There's not much right now, but like Blake said, for us, the first big rush of excitement is elm trees. So
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Denby's asked something. It's just a fun question, so I can't help but ask it because, it's always so interesting to hear a broad spectrum of opinions. Said one challenge with splits or requeening is finding and eliminating the old queen. What tips do you have on finding the old queen? And while you guys are thinking about that, just a side note to all you guys asking awesome questions. If you want the panel to answer a question, just put panel and then write your question. If it's just a general question, then don't put panel in front of it, and we'll answer that offline. So so what do you guys, when you're looking for queens, what's your top 1 or 2 tips to finding those queens?
Gosh, young eyes, I'll tell you. We're in
Finding
these
queen.
instead of my contacts. I think that my tip is that I just eliminate the frames that I know that the queen's not on. Just taking it down to the crux of the hive of what is where I'm supposed to be looking.
Mhm.
And then typically, I guess my eyes have gotten used to seeing the queen, but just narrowing it down to the space of where we're looking for the queen. She is bigger, but I know I've watched Blake's video and I know he's listening. I've heard he's on this conference call. Blake's video, he says, just tilt it this way, look at the frame in front of you, and there she is. And I'm like, this does not work for the real world, okay? It does, it really does. There's a lot, in class we find it that way, but often I just see the action, her movement, and not necessarily the retinue that forms around her, but the absence of bees from around her. And her short wings. I know she doesn't have short wings, but she has a long body, makes it look like she has short wings. And that makes it easy for me to see. But the tilt thing doesn't work for me, but it may work I know it does work for a ton of people, but for my eyes, it doesn't.
I think she waddles like a duck.
She kind of does.
Her
No,
abdomen
she
rocks back and
walks like a
forth.
boss. That's what she does.
That's right. That's
She
right.
walks like a boss.
Yeah.
And I kind of always assume that she's going to be on the darker side of the frame.
Mhm.
So if she's not on the first frame that I pull out, then I'm going to look for her on the inside, on the dark side, not the side that's already got light on it, because I think she's already run around under here.
Mhm.
So,
That's a
and
good point.
like Sherry says, eliminating the frames that she's not going to be on. She's not going to be up there in the honey. She's not going to be on those outside frames.
And
hopefully.
take them out. If you take them out and get them out of the equation. And that way you're reducing the frames that she can crawl back and forth on. So
Right. And you can, if you have, I had one time I had to find a queen in a big stack of boxes, and I had plenty of time. It wasn't a rush thing. I put queen reducer, or yeah, not a reducer, but excluder in between each box, and then came back the next week and narrowed it down to the box she was in. So that's helpful. You know, the one that has the eggs is the one she's in. So that makes that easier. You can also get a shaker box where you have a box down here that's got just frames on it, and then your queen excluder, and a box here that's got nothing in it. And you just shake your frames through there and all the bees will go through. Your queen can't fit, so her and the drones will stay up on the top. And I think something that I heard from Stan is a big white plastic bucket, because if you shake everything into the white plastic bucket, she sticks out like a boss. So that's another. But young eyes is really good too, and knowing where to look for, you know, knowing that she's most likely going to be on a brood frame, you know, a frame where there's other babies, looking where you expect to find her. That's always.
The young eyes is always true. During class, the young students, the 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds, always spot the queen first.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Says a lot for us wearing glasses.
Yeah, we have a big observation hive that we have out at the state fair, and you know, hundreds of people go past it hourly. You know, it's always crowded, and it's the kids that can just pop up and say, "There she is," and you know, everybody over 20 just sits there and stares for forever, and you get a little kid up there. There it is. I was like,
Because she waddles like a duck.
yeah.
All right, Matt, what do you think?
Oh, I have nothing to add, Blake. That's all
Okay.
great advice. Nothing to
All
add.
right, fantastic. Jackie asked a really random but cool question that's perfect for inside shop work in January. That is, how do you clean out your smokers? I'm curious to hear how do you guys clean out your smokers? Do you clean out your smokers?
I don't clean out my smokers. I had children to do that. So, you know, I have had to take, especially around the rim, you build up a lot of soot there on the rim, and it sometimes works against you for closing it off. A little bit of sandpaper, steel wool, something abrasive helps you with that. You know, I'd guess you could get in there with sandpaper as well if you had a lot of soot. So
How do we clean ours?
Well, we don't clean ours. We just consider that soot as additional fuel.
It's we have
that's beekeeping patina, right, James? It gives a
Right,
nice
it
good
is.
patina.
We have, I think that attests to the row of old smokers in the barn.
But I
We
do
replace-
agree with you, Matt, in that you do have to keep the rim clean, and on both the cap and the top of the smoker itself. And we would do that with a pocket knife or with your hive tool, just something to scrape it loose. But as far as cleaning the inside of the smoker, you know, really the only thing that's going to cut that soot is a chemical, and chemicals are not great for our bees. So I'd be cautious about doing that.
Yeah, cool, good points. Mike Patty actually in the comments had a suggestion that I've used before and does work. A propane torch works pretty well. So a propane torch, heat it up really high, it'll help burn it off, or you know, it's easy to pop off with a hive tool. Okay, Joe had a really good question. This is a pertinent to this time of year because we're heading. Oh, and Robert also said a torch. So heading into the spring, we're kind of all thinking about requeening. And so Joe says that, you know, he's hearing that queens should be replaced maybe every 12 to 18 months. He's had his hive about 16 months and it's doing well, but he's wondering if, you know, should he plan to requeen in the spring? And I'll add on there, when should he requeen in the spring? So how do you guys, as you're looking forward to spring and planning ahead, when do you requeen? How often do you requeen, and why, perhaps?
Well, let Cody or Matt start that.
Matt.
I do think it's a plan. It's a great plan to have a requeening schedule. It goes back to what you were showing in the video, Blake. You need to have good records. I always walk away from my hives thinking, oh yeah, I'll write that down when I get in the truck and I'll remember how old that queen is and yada, yada, yada. It never happens. So you do need good records. I do think you need a plan. It is, for me, it is about the, 18-month mark or so, somewhere around in there, where I start at least questioning a queen. And I'm going to look at indicators like laying pattern, number of brood, things like that. So, Joe, you certainly do need to have something in mind for that. But the second part of it is you got to have a queen. And so you got to get with folks like, Texas Bee Supply. You got to get some queens going, right? You got to find somebody nearby to have something to replace it with.
I have heard Dr. Rangel talk about queen longevity so many times that I want to keep all of my queens for as long as I can. Because I know so many beekeepers replace their queen every year just proactively, just to do it. So I think I'm going to do my part for the bees by letting her lay for as long as she can. And I'll probably wait until her laying pattern is really shoddy, like chickens. They lay really good and then they go down to medium eggs and then they go to small and then they skip a day. So when my queen starts skipping a lot of the cells, that's when I think, okay, it's time to replace her. And I like replacing in the fall because it's easier to get a queen and she can overwinter and she'll come out gangbusters early in the spring. So she really acts like a new queen that next year. So that's my thought process.
I couldn't agree with Dodie more. I've heard that same speech by Dr. Rangel where 60% of the queen's viability has been used in that first year. So that leaves, not good at math, but I think that's 40% for the duration of her life. So if we know that a queen has used 60% of her sperm in the first year, odds are that queen is her viability is going to decrease rapidly in year 2. Our year rule of thumb is pretty much what Dodie said, that first year, I bought a new April from Texas Bee Supply. Do I replace that queen in April of this next year? I really am not. I'm gonna let her go, and then I'm gonna do it in the fall. I'm gonna do that new queen for my splits and so forth, but I'm gonna let her go, and I'm gonna wait till the fall and requeen that one. I'm gonna get that full solid year of laying, because if you think about it, she's not really laying in the winter, but you may have a different opinion. We've done it both ways, really.
I believe that to be a successful beekeeper, you have to be proactive as opposed to reactive. Sure. If your goal is to maximize honey production, if your goal is to maximize bee production, if neither of those are your goal, then love that queen until she's not there anymore. But it's highly likely that if you function on the concept that she does have a limited span in which she's going to be productive, mm-hmm. and if you're willing to allow that colony population to dwindle during that time period where you might be on vacation and not be able to react to it, mm-hmm. or just the opposite, if you can't allow that to occur, mm-hmm. because you've decided that you're going to make splits in the fall and the population must be maximized. Mm-hmm. So I think it's beekeeper dependent, and it's what is your goal as a beekeeper. Mm-hmm. But we do know for a fact that a proactive beekeeper is more successful than a reactive beekeeper. Yeah. That's true, be it on varroa mites or nosema, mm-hmm. or keeping a colony warm and dry. Proactive is key.
So true.
Yeah, and I just have to mention, someone has such a good point in the comments in the chat. And if you guys don't watch the chat as we go along, you guys should watch the chat, because there's always great side conversations going. Somebody said that instead of killing that old queen, just take that old queen with a frame of brood, a couple empty frames, transfer it over into a Nook box, and take your strong hive, give them a brand new queen. but keep that old queen, whether it's at 12 months or 18 months, in that Nook box as a backup in case you need a new queen. And if she continues to lay well and grows up, and you can transfer that Nook into a single hive. But keep your strong hive strong by proactively giving them a queen. Put that old queen in a Nook box to use as a backup or to use to pull brood from. So love that suggestion.
I do too, but I also saw in there somebody asking about killing the old queen. I can't do that either. So I spent a summer with Art Thomas, and he could do it, just boom. And I'm like, I cringed every time, and I still can't do it. So I make Kevin do that part of our beekeeping. So I can't kill a queen either.
We used to,
Okay.
I was going to say, we used to eliminate queens during class when we were requeening colonies. And I found that the reaction by the new beekeepers is not positive. So now we just pull her out and put her to the side. And if somebody asks a question, that's how we answer what we're going to do with it.
There you go. There you go. Let's do a couple quick. There's a couple other questions on queens, and then we'll kind of wrap this up on queens, and then I want to just let you guys speak to whatever you want to speak on, and then I'll have a general question about late winter management for all of you guys, and then we'll start answering some of these questions in the Q&A box individually. But a couple quick things before we get off queens. Carly asked a really good point, or asked a good question. How can you tell a queen has spotty brood and is getting tired, or if it's just hygienic behavior? And then also any suggestions on how to requeen a really mean colony? So can maybe one of you take requeening a mean colony, and the other address how to tell spotty brood pattern versus hygienic behavior?
I'll do requeening a mean colony.
Okay, go for it.
There's power in numbers. So if you reduce the population of the colony that you're wanting to requeen by separating the boxes or separating frames within boxes, you'll find that the colony attitude changes dramatically when the power in numbers has been reduced. All of a sudden, they become a little submissive, and it makes it a lot easier to spot a queen.
It does.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I don't know that.
Sorry, that was our.
That
Sorry.
was our Alexa asking how you requeen a colony.
Oh, she answered for you. Did y'all hear that?
There you go. Cool.
Sorry about that.
Alexa knows her stuff. Yeah. So I would totally agree. I love splitting those mean colonies down into little bitty colonies. Yep. Love that.
Yep.
How about somebody want to tackle the other question?
Sure, I'll take. Go ahead. Go ahead, Dodie.
No, I was going to say, what was it? But if you got it, go.
Oh,
for
Matt's
it.
got it. Yeah.
Well, the question about how you tell spotty brood pattern,
Mhm.
you just do. I'm sorry to kind of say it, but you kind of learn, and you see a good smooth full pattern, you're great. Spotty, splotchy, and by spotty or splotchy, I don't mean swirl, right? Because that queen, as she's making her way around the frame, might be laying, and it kind of gives you the swirl, or it looks like a hurricane pattern. That's fine, because that's just her laying in a swirl and moving forward. It might be an indicator she's getting a little old, but it's certainly not splotchy. If it just looks like you shot a shotgun at a target and it's just holes here and there, that looks really weird with my background going on doing that. Holes here and there, that's what we're looking for. And that's an indicator that maybe it's about time to figure something out on her lifespan.
Yeah.
The other thing is about it, whether or not it's hygienic, is when was the last time you did a mite count? Do you have a lot of mites in there for her to be, for the
Yeah.
nurse bees to be pulling them? If you keep your mites low, then your hygienic behavior you shouldn't have that problem. And then you'll know that it's more of a spotty brood pattern. And also, as your queen ages, she'll lay spotty. So how old is your queen and what is your mite count would be two things to help you decide which one it is.
Great suggestion. Cool. Thank you guys. You guys are fantastic. So we've got about 10 minutes left. And so I want to let, each of you can take, maybe three minutes or so, and just share what you feel like would be the most important advice that you can give to a beekeeper, in late winter, coming into early spring. What do you guys feel like is just a critical piece of information that you can share and that they should know? Or if it's off topic, that's perfectly fine too. So whoever wants to start would be great, and then we'll just go down the line.
I'll go first.
Sure.
If you haven't been picking up your hives all winter long or trying to pick them up, start doing that now. It helps you feel how heavy they are, to know how much resources are in them. You don't have to open them. You don't have to walk through their flight path or by the front door. You just try to lift them up from the back. Just grab that bottom, the very bottom, or even the handle in the bottom box, and see if you can pick it up if you can lift it at all. The ones you can lift are the ones you need to start thinking about, that they've used up some of their resources, that they've eaten more of their honey than any of the other ones. Those are the ones you're going to have to feed first. So be lifting and be ready, be proactive about either putting the sugar bricks on them, or if we have warm days, getting some 2 to 1 out there for them to, because we lose a lot of our bees in February and March before the nectar flows really start. So lift your bees right now.
Great advice.
I'm going to defer to James and Sherry.
Okay.
Well, I was going to give myself a shameless plug. I wrote an article in this issue of the magazine, Texas Bee Supply Monthly magazine, that came out just the other day. Space in stores, space, bee to box ratio is so important all year long. Too much space, not enough space. And as we progress, and I guess we can call this winter. I mean, it's not winter yet. We often don't find or feel our winter in our area, Southeast Texas, until February. And right now we can still go out and work bees like it's, any other time, warm time of year. So paying attention to how many bees you've got in your box and the space that's there, because once it gets cold, you don't want to have to run out there and figure out if that cluster is going to be able to survive. Because if you've got a double deep and only have this many bees, they're not, not for a long period of time. You've got to make sure that the bee to box ratio is correct.
Well, I have multiple topics. So
Oh,
gosh,
pick
what do
one
I do?
in 1 minute.
Every day that goes by since December 21st is 47 seconds longer than the day before.
That's right.
What that means to our colonies of bees is they recognize that the world is changing, spring is coming, and at the onset of that first dump of pollen, they think it's spring. I don't care if it's December or if it's February, that's when they believe it is. Colony population is everything in beekeeping. That we seek to have large colonies of bees, yet we don't always pay attention to the honey stores we've talked about so often tonight. It's interesting, especially to a new beekeeper, that bees starve, are most likely to starve, if they're going to starve, during spring when the flowers are everywhere. And that's just so interesting, in that colony populations are growing so fast. There are so many mouths to feed, but the foragers, the older bees, populations are dying off every single day. So there's an irrational responsibility of care which cannot be maintained unless we're careful with how much brood we're rearing. So be careful about feeding the pollen. Remember that bees do starve during the spring. Keep that population up. And yes, you can feed too much. Bees to space ratio, if you feed, and the queen has no place to lay, then you'll have a premature swarm. And gosh, you've got to start all over with a small colony.
And you've spent a lot of money feeding them as well.
Yes, you did. It says a lot for, Dodie was mentioning this before, that if you have multiple colonies and one seems to be very light on stores, then feel free to share frames of honey from other
Oh,
colonies,
absolutely.
that's a whole lot better than putting sugar water. If you have excess in other colonies, your bees will appreciate it. They might even send you a Christmas card next year.
Well, Blake, do you see how I do that? You got all the good answers out before you got
Yeah.
the last one. The bad
Very,
answers out.
very
that-
smooth.
James and
I-
Sherry and Doty's advice would be exactly what I would share too. Doty, were you gonna throw something in there?
Yeah, when I steal my honey, I don't extract it all. I have a deep freeze that has maybe 5 or 6 frames in it of honey still, and they're still sitting there in the deep freeze. So that is one of the first things that I'm going to do with my lighter hives, is thaw out some of those frames of honey and just pull the old one out and stick a new one in, and it'll be like a party for them. So yeah, but make sure that the frame dethaws, comes up to room temperature. Don't put it in that box cold.
It will drip.
Yeah, there'll be lots of moisture. And,
All right, Matt, what do you got?
Well, Blake said we could go a little bit off script and be a little tangential here. So,
Please.
so I would follow everything that Doty, James, and Sherry said. Those are all good advice. But then there's 2 other things I would also say you ought to be thinking about in January, winter kind of period, and that is woodenware. If you're not building out, getting ready for what you might need, if you're doing that kind of stuff, things like keeping your place tidy, all that good stuff, checking on wax moths if they've gotten into any honey supers that you might have stored, all that kind of maintenance-y kind of stuff that you got to do in the winter. But then also this is the time of New Year's resolutions. And so making New Year's resolutions, making your goals, making your plans, how many do you want to grow to? Do you want to grow? Do you want to cut back? What do you want to do? And then also always thinking about what can you do for your community with bees. And, I sit down in January and make goals about how many inner city Houston schools I'm going to visit in 2022 to teach them about bees. And guys, I can't tell you, I've said this to James and Sherry before, but for all the good that bees have done in my life, I will never be able to repay them for the good things they've done to me. I've learned Spanish because of bees. I'm a professor at a university, and I've traveled internationally because of bees, not because of my job at a university, So, I mean, it's those kinds of things that you have to also protect in yourself as a beekeeper, because as you grow, you're going to find that it might get a little more stressful, and it might stop being a hobby for you, and it's going to start feeling more like a job. And in these months, that's when I try to spend my time restoring my beekeeping cup, if you will. So I didn't know bees spoke Spanish. They continued to surprise me. Yeah, I had a chance to pick up Spanish because I was going into inner city Houston school districts, schools to teach kids about bees, finding that I was the only guy speaking English and I needed to learn how to speak some Spanish. And I also, been around traveling to other parts, doing bee removals, and needed to be able to communicate with people. So I sat down and learned a little bit of Spanish.
That's awesome.
Overachiever.
Well, guys, thank you so much. And man, my compliments, we are right on time. So you guys are the most precise panel in the history of beekeeping. So, but thank you to Matt and Doty and James and Sherry. And I'm sure everyone, judging by the comments, just really appreciates all of your time. And we look forward to seeing all of you again. And Doty, I know you've been on several times. The Elams are here all the time. And Matt, we'd love to have you back at some point and give you a 30-minute chunk. And we'd love to hear more of your expertise.
Anytime.
Appreciate that. But yeah, everyone stay warm, and hopefully we have an uneventful February, unlike in 2021. And we really look forward to seeing all of you in February when bee season really kicks off in a big way. And so we'll have a very busy February webinar for you guys. So if you have any other questions, feel free to keep putting them in the Q&A. We'll hang out and answer them. Otherwise, we will see all of you in a month. Have a great one, guys.
Night, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Y'all happy New Year.
Thanks, guys.